What's up, humans, and welcome to a new Psicoactivo. Happy Wednesday, everybody. Okay, I want to thank everybody for the great support of my previous video about Dr. Richard Banduric. The reaction was a little mixed within the UFO community because some folks that are known seem to have just breezed past the statements that he made back in December. They flat out ignored them. Maybe it wasn't on the radar or something, but I did realize that, for example, Joe Murgia at the UFO Joe on X is very skeptical about Dr. Banduric. And one of his policies of Joe is to remain skeptical. And that's a good policy to have because we're dealing in a field where there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation, but we're also on a field where there's a lot of ego wars. And this is happening at the very top too. There seem to be at least 2 or 3 groups that are trying to convince people in Congress that their version of disclosure is the one that should be paid attention to. And that's a mistake. I think that people should talk amongst each other. This is something that I've been saying for a while. And the same thing, I think, is happening here with Dr. Banduric and his statements. And I know now that Dr. Eric Davis does not believe anything that Dr. Richard Banduric is talking about. There's a possibility that Dr. Hal Puthoff doesn't believe him either. And I just want to show you what was said. First of all, I want to thank Mr. Whitley Strieber because I asked him for a quote and he gave me one. He didn't just do that. He actually recorded a video specifically for Psicoactivo. So I want to thank him for it. What he did was he read the excerpt from his book directly. So I'm going to refresh your memory from yesterday from Mr. Whitley Strieber's own voice. So here's Mr. Whitley Strieber talking about what he discussed about Banduric, and he doesn't want to comment on the latest comments from December. So here is Mr. Strieber.
Hi, I'm Whitley Strieber. I can't comment about Richard Banduric's recent comments, but I did explore his work for my book, The Fourth Mind. This is what I wrote in The Fourth Mind about Richard Banduric and his theories. We have many theories of instantaneous movement, any one of which, if it proves workable, would deliver mastery over space and time to the human species. Warp drives, electromagnetic drives, ionocraft, and others have all been proposed. None of them are far advanced, at least in the public space, but one, described in a paper by Richard Banduric called Breakthrough Spacecraft Propulsion Concept by Breaking Green's Reciprocity, might be a candidate for becoming a practical reality, and for a very unexpected reason. Banduric argues that charged elements, when in motion, will measure different forces despite interacting with the same electric field. This effect is called the breaking of reciprocity and means that thrust could be generated from the imbalance. This thrust would not require expelling mass like a rocket and therefore would enable unlimited acceleration. Banduric presented his idea at the Alternative Propulsion Engineering Conference in December of 2020. Similar to the wormhole concept, Banduric's proposal would enable the bending of space-time, but without the inherent instability of wormholes, as pointed out by Stephen Hawking, who argued that the negative energy needed to keep a wormhole open can never be strong enough to stabilize it. The breaking of reciprocity does not result in a similar instability, but it does require very substantial energy. This is what I wrote about Banduric's ideas. I think this is a very solid idea. Again, I do not know how to evaluate his present claims.
There's that.
Fuel propulsion technologies. My background is electrical engineering and mathematics. And 40 years ago, I was involved in a company, the part owner that used to do reverse engineering. And one of the things that came out of there, some of the NGOs that were trying to reverse engineer advanced technologies that pinged us to look at some of the stuff they had. And that got me really curious because this stuff was definitely way more advanced than we actually have. So one of the things that ended up is I ended up getting pulled into classified programs. And in there, one of the things I wanted to look at was to see if the U.S. government actually was using these technologies. And it turned out that my conclusion was the U.S. government was not. So the ones that I worked with were trying to figure out how these rather large craft, which people call triangles, would be able to disappear on a dime. So when we were set up looking at these triangles, when they decloaked and they recloaked, we didn't see anything like that. What we really saw was it appeared to be that these triangles were taking whatever was, an example would be whatever was behind them and actually projecting it in front of them, which might be equivalent to taking the light rays and bending it around the actual triangle. And so our conclusion, they were doing something along those lines. They were probably doing it with a lot less energy. But some of the conditions we observed them on was a lot of times where they were observing behind them would be a little different than what we would be observing. So what they would do is we would assume would be projecting what's behind them in front of them, but it really wouldn't be quite what we would be seeing. And then we had an idea that we could probably track these triangles because their cloak or whatever they're using to bend the light around them was never going to be exactly the same. So some of that work that I was doing with NGOs was really exciting. But one of the other things that comes out of this is these individuals or whoever this group is that has this advanced technology probably does not want us to reverse engineer what they're working on. So they're probably using their methods or their technologies to try to keep us from doing things like reverse engineering or exploring how they work, just because of the fact that gives them an advantage over us.
And then we have this one.
Smart materials. Like one of the things is when these materials, you'd be looking at them and you try to reverse engineer them, that they would turn to dust. And they would do it within a minute or two. And then so you could take the dust and then set it off and get the isotopic analysis done on them. And they were extraterrestrial. But these materials, I mean, we're looking at something that's hundreds of years ahead of us. When you look under a microscope or an electron microscope, you're looking at something that's composed of very small particles that seem to be communicating with one another. So those are the things that I've been involved in that we can talk about. But, I think that's one of the reasons why extraterrestrial materials are not really available to most people, is because most of them are set to disintegrate if they get in the wrong hand. Isotopic analysis of the dust that's left behind tells you it's extraterrestrial, at least where it was manufactured. But so we're looking at materials that can reconfigure themselves. So they are composed of small subunits. So the type of things I looked at were something as small as a sliver of metal. The head would reconfigure itself depending on where it was. It would cloak itself and it would try to blend into the environment. So the ones that this one NGO used to get a hold of were the ones that were technically broken. I guess the ones that didn't really function very well. So then you could collect them every once in a while and then try to analyze them. You could do things like split them apart, and they would attempt to find each other or reconfigure. Some of the experiments they did was we took one of those and we put it on a very hot surface of about 3,000 degrees. And what it would do is it cooled the surface around itself. And then when we took the device off and then weighted again, we would find that the mass would be reduced by a certain amount.
Do these feel like programmed materials to you, Richard?
Yeah, they were, like I was saying, they're more intelligent materials. Like these subunits probably had computational functionality, right? Because they knew what their neighbors were all about, and they knew they could reprogram themselves to be something different, right? If they needed to change themselves. So these are really curious types of materials. So that's how we could kind of tell they were extraterrestrial, because these things weren't like decades ahead of us. They were probably hundreds of years ahead of us.
So here is where the controversy is, because I saw Joe Murgia right after this recent virality of Richard Bandurich, his statements. And he expressed that he was really skeptical about Richard. And this prompted Joe to reach out to Dr. Eric Davis. So he asked about Bandurich, and this is what Dr. Davis stated, according to the UFO Joe Murgia. To me, this is kind of shots fired from Dr. Davis. Joe says, can I break 1,000 likes by sharing bad news? Because he's mentioning the 1,000 likes that Ross Coulthard's tweet about Banduric received. He said, I was skeptical of Bandurich's claims. So last night I asked Dr. Eric Davis what he thought. And I quote, Banduric is a liar on par with Burisch, Lazar, Fouche, and Michael Moran. I've already told his story in other chat groups because I met him at the 2021 JANAF virtual meeting. No real UAP WUSA personnel would ever come out and say one single word about their work because of the counterintelligence investigation, polygraph, prosecution, and conviction for violating the relevant national security laws and regulations. Those people are held up to much higher security scrutiny than guys with TS-SCI clearance, end quote. So yeah, shots fired. I just want to ask though, because this statement confused me a little bit because, you know, the debate of whether ARVs are a real thing or not. Dr. Eric Davis was on American Alchemy on an interview that was conducted by UAP GERB and Missile Man and Thembir as well. And they asked him directly point blank about ARVs, and Dr. Eric Davis flat out denied that ARVs are real. And that's one of the main topics of contention about this, that ARVs exist or not. And him claiming this so matter-of-factly naturally would make anyone doubt Dr. Eric Davis. But I also understand that people like him, people like Dr. Hal Puthoff, people like Dr. Kit Green, Dr. Gary Nolan, who could be part of some of these programs and probably potentially signed NDAs, and they have this mentality of national security, they're obliged to lie and to not tell the truth. And whenever they're asked something that is true, they're obliged to say, no, that's bullshit. I get that. And based on that, it's kind of hard to trust somebody like Dr. Eric Davis when he makes claims like these. And then he mentioned Burisch and Lazar, and you guys know how much contention there is about both of them, not just Lazar, Burisch as well. So I understand that he can't really say the truth. You got to read between the lines when you see a statement like this. And also something that I think needs to be pointed out is that Dr. Richard Bandurich has an incredible resume. He worked for NASA, he worked for DARPA, he worked for Lockheed. All of those are usual suspects of the secret keeping, you could call it. And I don't know if Dr. Eric Davis is saying here that Dr. Richard Bandurich is part of the disinformation campaign. It kind of seems that way. Or what is he saying? And there's another aspect that I want to touch on that includes the group that Dr. Eric Davis is a part of. And that group is Dr. James Lakatsky, Jay Stratton, everybody at DIA, Dr. Hal Puthoff. There seems to be this behavior from them and from people that follow them that it makes me think that they consider them the absolute authority on UFOs and on these topics. And I don't think they're the only ones that have credentials that important and impressive that are trying to find out what's going on. And this is where this part about the race to be the ones who get disclosure or to be the ones who push their narrative of disclosure comes into play. I just want to ask, for example, Dr. Anna Brady-Estevez, what does she think about what Dr. Eric Davis is presumably saying here about Dr. Banduric? I don't know. It just makes this a lot more difficult to gauge because, yeah, Dr. Banduric has a lot of great credentials as Dr. Eric Davis, and now it's a he say versus he said contest. And this is part of the issue here, that people that presumably are reliable and are credible on both sides are calling each other names and telling each other that they're liars. And this has been going on forever. It always happens. And I just want to know, what's the deal here? Who really is telling the truth and who isn't? I just want to know. And I want to know what you guys have to say about all this. I think it's an alarming development. This is not the first time that Dr. Eric Davis has flat out called people a liar. And I just want to know, what's your reaction to this? And just so you know, this is a list of all the patents that Richard Banduric has. It's a lot. A lot. I'm sure Dr. Eric Davis has a lot too, but dude knows what he's doing and he knows what he's talking about. So what's the deal? Why this reaction? And why lump Dan Burisch and Bob Lazar in with a group of liars, as Dr. Eric Davis is claiming? I would love to know. I would love a statement from Dr. Eric Davis that is like a little more direct, and also a statement from Dr. Richard Banduric. See what he thinks about this, because these are shots fired, I would say. And it comes from two people that have incredible credentials. So let's see what happens. But I just want to hear what you have to say about this. What do you have to say about Whitley Strieber's statement about Dr. Banduric? And what do you have to say about Dr. Eric Davis calling Banduric a liar? This is unfortunate, but it is what it is. Let me know in the comments. If you like the content you see, I'm going to ask you to like, share, comment, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. That's all you need to do in order to help us, and it is what helps us the most. So thank you. But if you want to support us in other ways, you can click a link in the description. You can support us through KGRA. You can become a member. Anything you choose to do is always appreciated. So thank you. That's it for me today on this video, but I'll see you guys in the next one. Remember, stay curious and inquisitive like Whitley Strieber. Always. Thank you, Whitley. Bye.